For the past 45 years, I have been investigating the unsolved death of my sister, Teresa Allore. Teresa disappeared in Quebec, Canada in 1978. We were being told by the police that it could have been a drug overdose. Homicide is off the radar. She was not a drug addict. To me, her being found in her bra and her underwear in the middle of nowhere suggests sexual murder. I just wanted to know, whatever the truth was. It's decades later. I wasn't supposed to do my whole life doing this. I know my parents worry about me. I know my brother worries.
I feel very much that this is a story about two tragedies. It's important for me to be here today to be part of the work that John started on the investigation of my sister Teresa's death. I seriously thought about not doing it, but I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I didn't partake in this and try to complete the story in some way for John and for the family, for all of us.
I ride a bike and I cycle at least 30 miles every day because I need 2 hours to myself. My sister definitely, I think, found a sense of escape on the bike. I even find myself like adopting her style, which was to ride low. And it's not a heady thing. I don't make too much about it, but I know what it is. I know why I do it. The more I investigate the murder of my sister, the more I'm forced to confront the horror of Teresa's death, because your whole objective is to know the truth. So I'm being forced to confront the place I don't really want to go, whether I like it or not. I come from a family of a brother and a sister. Teresa was my older sister. I also have an older brother, Andre. We all three of us were born in southern Ontario in Canada.
It was always a fun time growing up. And with John and Teresa, there was always something going on. There was never a dull moment.
Teresa was fun, adventurous, caring. She would stick up for the little guy, and I definitely looked up to Teresa. We all did. By the late summer of 1978, Teresa had decided on going to Champlain College in a rural town called Lennoxville, about 100 miles outside of Montreal. My brother was also at the same school. Teresa was last seen around 6 o'clock in the evening outside the dining hall where students traditionally waited for the bus. Her residence was about 10 kilometers from the campus. The first realization that something is wrong is that she had told a couple of friends that she might stop by their room to listen to records later after she finished her book report, and she's a no-show. People are like, well, maybe she decided to go back to Montreal. We'll see her in class Monday morning. Monday arrives. There's no sign of Teresa. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, fellow students notify my brother, who was there, and say, none of us have seen Teresa.
My worry meter at that time was very, very high. Went to her room. Things looked like they hadn't been touched, and she hadn't been there. Then Friday, I called home, and I said, Teresa has been missing for a week.
My parents come into my bedroom and they say to me, Teresa's missing. We're going to drive to Quebec to find out what's going on. There's meetings between my parents and the police and school officials. Some of the theories that the authorities told my parents were, your daughter is a runaway. Your daughter is a drug dealer and she's running drugs. Your daughter is a lesbian. She's ashamed and she's decided to isolate herself. None of those theories made sense to my family, but a missing person investigation was initiated. There were posters made up with Teresa's photo, have you seen this woman, and notices in the local newspapers.
My parents thought that the local police who were involved in the investigation were doing what they needed to do, but it wasn't really going anywhere. Now it's Christmas time, and we're all back home dealing with Teresa's disappearance. We all knew something was horribly wrong.
Our Christmases were so full of life. That was gone. But there was always that hope that this would resolve itself. And she would show up, and it would be some kind of grandiose misunderstanding. Good Friday, April 13th, 1979. It's spring, snow's starting to melt. There's a muskrat trapper at the side of the road in Compton, Quebec, which is about a kilometer from the student residence where Teresa had been living. And he goes into a small wooded area to set some traps, and he sees near some brush what he thinks is a mannequin. And as he gets closer, he realizes that it's the body of a woman. Face down in a small body of water, in her bra and her underwear, and he immediately phones the police. One of the investigators at the scene knew that Teresa's been missing for 5.5 months. So he makes the phone call to my father and asked him to come and identify the body. We all got in the car and drove to the headquarters of the Sûreté du Québec in downtown Montreal, which housed the coroner's office at that time. And my father walked down a hallway into the morgue.
To this day, I remember him coming back. It was as white as a ghost, and he just told us that it was Teresa.
The guy who went down that hallway was not the guy who came out the other side, and he was never quite the same again. When they actually do the autopsy, the coroner says, my conclusion is violent death of undetermined means. Well, what does that mean? Violent death caused by her? Caused by someone else? What is it?
Undetermined violent means. Those words alone don't provide you with any closure at all on Teresa's death.
My parents were being told by the police essentially that this was her fault, that It could have been a variety of options that all blamed her. It was a drug overdose, and she wandered there. Some students found her dead in her bed and panicked, so decided to wrap her in a blanket and dump her there. The message going out to the press is the same message. There's an article that's published very prominently, and the headline is Teresa Lohr, A History of Drugs or A Drug Story. It was a very intense few days, overwhelming. For 5.5 months, we all questioned what was going on here.
I returned to Champlain College, and I was asked to attend a meeting with the head investigator on the case, and he presented me with 2 of Teresa's personal items. Number 1 was her wallet, and number 2 was her gray scarf. And he said, we found the scarf in the field by the bridge in Compton and the wallet over on McDonald Road, which was miles away.
Teresa's red wallet had been found at the side of a back road as if it had been tossed from a moving vehicle, which was inconsistent and bizarre.
I don't think we ever really made sense of it. My parents seemed to think that something happened at the residence. Something must have happened. Of course, to a certain extent, you do put that on yourself. Because I was at that residence, okay? Everybody knew one another. We were all living somewhat together. How could I not know something?
Right around the 1-year anniversary of her disappearance, my father was at a crossroads. Were they going to take legal action against a police force or against the school? What was the next step? And I think he just made the decision, I need to live now with my 2 surviving children and my wife, because that's the priority. And leave matters inconclusive in regard to the death of Teresa. At various points, I think we all blamed ourselves for this because we were unable to do anything to stop it. But we all decided it was best to move on. By 2002, I'm no longer living in Canada. And I had a family of my own. I had a 5-year-old daughter, and I began to question the legacy of my elder sibling dying, and what was the message in that entire horrible event? What was I going to tell my children? I didn't have a good answer. So I realized that I needed to learn about everything to do with my sister's death. But I'm living in North Carolina, so I had to very quickly become a cyber detective to do the majority of my investigation online.
John was determined to investigate Teresa's case and get to the bottom of what exactly happened. I was probably a little more apprehensive about, jumping right into this.
The initial step was looking through libraries of newspaper digests and things like that. Then I phoned the Quebec police and I said, can I see my sister's case file? They said, yes, I can. So the next step was to fly to Quebec and visit the police headquarters where the case file was. And it all kind of just cascaded from there. An investigator brought a box, and I methodically went through papers and testimonies and translating. What does this mean? At the conclusion of that day, as I left, I asked, what about the physical evidence? What about the bra and underwear? And he said, it's been destroyed, it's been disposed of. And I said, it's been what? Well, when did that happen? He said, well, that happened about 5 years after she was found. And he said it in a manner that was like, well, we do this all the time. I was shocked. This was another aha moment. While in Quebec, it was very important for me to see physical places. I wanted to see where Teresa was found, where the wallet was found. I wanted to see where she was last seen. And I'm right at the site where her body was found, trying to reconcile these theories of she might have overdosed in the residence, or she might have been a runaway, with how she was found, how she was dressed, what was missing, what was found further away. I came to a conclusion that this was not a drug overdose. This was a murder. This is a panorama of the dump site. At a certain point, I wanted for the public, particularly the residents of Sherbrooke, Eastern Townships, Lennoxville, to know what I was learning. And so I had a friend, Patricia Pearson, who was a crime writer for Toronto newspapers. And in the summer of 2002, the two of us together wrote a series of 3 articles. And I started a website called Who Killed Teresa, which investigated the unsolved murder of my sister. The whole purpose of it was for people to come forward and contribute information. After the articles, a reporter contacted me for a follow-up interview, and then rather nonchalantly, he told me that he had a document that he had retrieved, and it was a second coroner's report, not the one that said violent death of undetermined means. This document was from the day of the discovery of the body, April 13th, 1979. The new document was faxed over to me, so I'm reading it along, and it says, strangulation marks around the neck. And I'm like, what? How does this piece of evidence reconcile with a drug overdose? To me, it points to homicide. But what you read on paper is only leading you to more questions, for which you want more information, which leads to more questions. So one of the things I wanted to do was to verify if there was drugs in her system when she died. And I was trying to find the toxicological report, and lo and behold, it was in my father's pile of documents, but it was kind of hidden, and it seems to me that he hadn't looked at it either. When I looked at the toxicological report, it stated undeniably that there were no evidence of drugs in her system. None, nothing.
This was a huge eye-opener to hear something that was determined years ago, but was kept from the family.
You have another document that flies in the face of the police's theory. They say drugs, this document says no drugs. I began to realize that, wait a minute, the police are an inhibitor to the process. Why didn't they fully investigate my sister's case? The realization that my sister Teresa was murdered naturally led to, by who? So I began to look at the public record about what else was going on at that time in the area around the college campus, and came to find that not only was it a time of intensely clustered sexual assaults against women, but also there were an awful lot of murders happening that I felt were related or informative to Teresa's murder. The earliest case is 17 months before Teresa's incidents. A woman in her 20s named Louise Camara is last seen at a corner store in downtown Sherbrooke. Her body is found in the woods just outside of Sherbrooke. She was raped, and there was a bootlace around her neck. In January 1978, 10-year-old Manon Zubey goes missing in downtown Sherbrooke. Her body is found in a creek not far from where Teresa's body was found. In June, 18-year-old Carol Facteau is found naked in a stream. Her wallet is found deposited by the side of the road. None of the cases, Zubey, Louise Cameron, Carol Facteau, were ever solved. One of the things that just seemed logical to me to do, why don't we document where they were found and see if there's some kind of association with the geographic plot points. The most striking thing about the map initially is somebody is committing a crime in the cluster around downtown Sherbrooke and then disposing of the evidence. What I suspected was that one offender was responsible for these murders.
John was developing more of a serial killer type of theory around what had happened to Teresa. This wasn't just an isolated case anymore. There were other women in the area that died in similar situations.
I needed the muscle of a professional, and that muscle was Kim Rosmo. He's a Canadian who was trained as a behavioral profilist by the FBI in Quantico. And we went to him and said, well, I have a map where I plotted all these points. He said, that's geographic profiling. Through the data points, what you want to arrive at is a probable location of where the offender lived or habituated, and ultimately who that offender was. I asked him, based on what we know, can you suggest an offender who would most likely be responsible for these murders? And he said, yes, I can, and his name is Luc Gregoire. Kim Rosmo told me Luc Gregoire had a rap sheet in the area for numerous sexual assaults and rapes, and in 1993, he committed the murder of a convenience store clerk, and for that, he was convicted and given a life sentence.
I thought that Luc Gregoire could have been the person who was responsible for Teresa's death and other women who died of a similar nature in the area.
So Kim Rosmo contacted the Sûreté de Quebec, saying that it's highly probable that these unsolved murders were committed by one person, and the cases need to be looked at together. So that was the lever that was pulled to say, okay, police, you have your professional verdict, investigate these crimes as the possible work of a serial sexual offender. The evidence was stacking up against Gregoire. It felt I was moving in the right direction. The pursuit of Luc Gregoire was done in conjunction with the Sûreté de Quebec. I have had helpful investigators and not so helpful investigators. And for a time, I had a very helpful investigator who planted a mole in Gregoire's cell to see if they could get Gregoire to admit something, and he never did. And then in 2015, he died in prison. There was no follow-up from the police. I wanted justice for my sister and my family, so I partnered again with Patricia Pearson to write a book. It was called Wish You Were Here, and it laid out the case against Luc Gregoire. One of the points of the book was for people to respond to it and say, you're right or you're wrong. The book comes out in the fall of 2020. You go fishing and you wait to see what you're going to catch. After the book was published, it took a while but eventually people started to come forward with potential suspects. And in the fall of 2021, I received an email from a person living in the Eastern Townships in Sherbrooke, who I will call Alex, who wanted to report to me a deathbed confession by a relative named Gerald Lachance. And it was about an episode where he was involved in the abduction and murder of a young woman in the fall of 1978. So the story is this. Gerald Lachance was out joyriding with his older brother, Regis Lachance, and a third person who was described as younger in the driver's seat. And they picked up a young female hitchhiker in Lennoxville, Quebec, where my sister was last seen. They proceeded to drive. Somewhere along the way, they pulled over to the side of the road, and Regis got out of the passenger seat and dragged the young woman out of the car, down an embankment, and disappeared into the darkness in the night. After a period of time, Gerald gets out of the car to see what's happened. He walks down the embankment and discovers his older brother holding the hitchhiker underwater as if to drown or choke them. He says, "What's going on?" Regis bursts out and says, "Get back in the car." And they drive off in the night, leaving this young female victim dead or near death. The description of the event eerily matched what could have happened to my sister Teresa. Alex said also that the older brother, Regis, was already deceased by this point. And that not only was he responsible for other crimes in the area, he may have been responsible for other murders. Alex cited the 1977 murder of Louise Camera. They cited the murder of Carol Facteau in 1978. They also mentioned that the police possibly knew of him and that he was a protected member of organized crime. Protected means he was a police informant, meaning the lead suspect in your sister's murder is protected by the police. It is, holy take your breath away, yeah. I want to introduce a piece of evidence here, the red wallet belonging to my sister, which she had in her possession the day she died. The moment that Regis Lachance was profiled as a suspect, there was this realization that the wallet may hold a DNA sample that would match Regis Lachance. And I took the wallet and the Lachance DNA swab to a local lab. They tested them, and what came back is frustratingly the worst possible result. It was inconclusive. The wallet contained male DNA. We didn't know who it belonged to. That was disappointing, very frustrating. Another dead end in so many dead ends, but you pick up and you try something else.
This wallet, is this a piece of your sister's life?
I don't go there. I can't go there. The idea of holding the wallet and it holding some powerful connection with Teresa, that all of that is true, but none of that is very useful to me as an investigator, because you're trying not to mourn the victim, you're trying to solve their murder. So now I want to go to Canada for the specific purpose of finding even more supporting evidence that is compelling to say that this is the right suspect, Regis Lachance.
My phone rang, and it was a state trooper. John has been involved in an accident. Okay, what kind of an accident has John been involved in? There's silence. Where is John? Is he in the hospital? No, he died in the accident. He was struck by a car on his bike. I broke down and cried. I couldn't talk to him anymore. I had to hand the phone to my wife. We just couldn't believe it, that this had happened. John has done so much on his own over the last 35 years with all of this investigative work. This case continues forward, even without John being here. And I think that's very important to continue to do.
There is a journalist, Nicolas Berube, who you're going to meet with in Montreal and discuss the potential of publishing a new article.
When I learned that John was killed riding his bike, doing what he loved, it was such a shock. 2 days after his passing, he was supposed to fly to Montreal. We were supposed to meet and discuss the way the story could move forward. John learned that Gérald and Régis Lachance were two brothers who lived in the Sherbrooke area at that time. Teresa was found. They were very violent men. John believed that Régis Lachance was the best candidate for being his sister's killer. We got this information through a deathbed confession from his brother.
I think Teresa was hitchhiking from Lennoxville to Compton, and she thought that she was going to get a ride back to the Compton residence, and she got into the car with the wrong people. It's a hard thing to really process in your head, the way that she died. Probably because to a certain extent, I don't want to.
Prior to his death, John gave me the contact information of this person, a family member who got the deathbed confession. And I contacted this family member, interviewed them to write a story about the confession. But a few days before the article was to publish, this family member contacted me and basically they had cold feet. If this story comes out, it might upset some people who are still alive today, even if it's a story that happened many decades ago. They have people who could basically hurt you if you cross them. And so I decided with my editors to not publish the story because it would put this person in danger. And I know John was upset about that. He was not happy, but he understood. I feel that my duty now is to publish this best theory that we have, and to do it in a way that wouldn't jeopardize the safety of this person. And now I feel that it's upon me to do it.
Hello, Mr. Nicholas.
Hi, Stéphane. How are you?
Pretty good yourself.
I'm good, thank you. Stéphane Luce worked with John for many years. He's met with that person who's part of the Lachance family and got a deathbed confession.
What brought me and John together was the fact that I was seeking people that have lived the same thing that I lived. We both lost a loved one. He lost his sister and I lost my mother. She was murdered back in 1981. We became good friends. Once the first or second beer was taken, we would talk about cases and it would last for a few hours.
I'm writing this story, around the idea that John had contact with Régis Lachance's family member.
I heard lots of things, you know. The most interesting element was the Régis Lachance theory. There were 3 persons in the car.
I got the same story you had. Régis Lachance reportedly was in the back with Teresa, and there was Gérard Lachance, Régis' brother, and there was a third person who apparently was the driver.
That's what I wanted to talk about with John, you know. Who's the third person? Who's that driver? And I said it to the police first, and, you know, I don't think they took me seriously. Finding out who that person is, I think, would be the key to the answer of this investigation.
The point to all of this is there is still the potential that the young man who was driving the car that night is still alive and therefore is a potential witness to the murder of my sister.
The driver, that person might still be alive today. What sense do you have of who that person might be?
It must be somebody very, very close to the Lachance. Most probably a friend, or maybe someone part of the family.
At one point I was corresponding with a defense attorney who had worked in that area, and he had told me about a case that he had worked on that had been really screwed up as consequence to the police's actions, and in particularly the testimony of a police informant. The police informant's name was Régis Lachance.
We were shocked because did that status protected him from scrutiny? Did the investigators have an incentive not to dig in too deep into who killed Teresa? Did they explore every avenue, or it was more convenient not to do that? Did they ask, and they didn't like the answer they were given? This article can keep the ball rolling.
True.
Maybe a person who was afraid to talk like 40 years ago, or even 20 years ago, maybe now they have something they want to get off their chest.
Yeah, exactly. At least answers will be given to the family. You know, I mean, John's parents and John's brother, they still need answers.
If that person is still alive today, the hope was that they can come forward and they can be contacted by the police, or it was at least a possibility that they could help solve this.
Well, I hope that someone will come forward and say what happened that night. I count on that article to get more answers.
John's legacy is, of course, the investigation work that he's done around my sister's death. He worked so hard on Teresa's case. It's also more than that. John had many different facets of his life. He was a stage actor, a budget director for the town of Durham. He was a family man. He loved his 3 daughters. I'll definitely miss John.
Do you mind if we film your little mouse sock?
My daughter is going to be so happy that you did. Whether it makes the final cut or not, she's just going to be happy. I wish Teresa could have known my kids. I see so much of her in them, in all of them. That's really the problem when somebody dies. It's less about the tragedy that they didn't fulfill their life, although that is sorrowful. It's more about how they left you to fulfill your life without them. On a very real level, I never feel that I don't have my sister. spiritually or whatever you believe, their wisdom carries on and informs you, or it becomes your wisdom or your sixth sense. I'm not alone on this quest. I'm not alone. I've never felt that way. All we do on this earth, ultimately, is we move through space, and it's just not the kick that it was moving through space without her.
My obsession is to investigate and find missing victims. I think that there is value in doing that, especially as we move this case along that no one else is looking into. Israel Keyes said, "I'm a serial killer who's traveled the country for the last 12 years, and I killed over 50 people." He would travel the country and hide kits full of weapons, rape tools, sometimes costumes. He's known as the most meticulous serial killer who would plan crimes years in advance. This is about Keyes and his victims and their families.
Yeah, I have articles.
What's been really important to me is taking trips to places Keyes went to look into potential victims. If we can get people interested in this case and get more information out there, we're likely to get more information back, which could help us identify victims. Maybe I can find something the FBI couldn't. In an unreleased interview, the FBI reported that his victims ranged in age from late teens to the elderly. Now, there's a few things to note. My name is Josh Hallmark. I produce a podcast called True Crime Bullshit. I've returned to the tapes and files to reassess the period. In 2012, I was living in Seattle writing advertising materials for nonprofit healthcare insurance. I quickly found a coworker who was also a big consumer of true crime media and was fascinated with crime. And so we would have our weird little water cooler talks about crimes that were interesting or scary or, devastating. And one day she kind of peeked over the cubicle wall and was like, "Hey, there's this new serial killer. Have you heard about this guy?" And so that piqued my interest immediately. It was like, oh, there's a modern day serial killer. So we started looking at the Samantha Koenig case. Samantha Koenig was a barista living in Anchorage, Alaska. She was working at a drive-through coffee stand. Was closing up one night in early 2012. A man came by, ordered a coffee. He crawled through the window and abducted her. The first ransom request texted the family to go to a park and go to the bulletin board there, and underneath a missing dog poster was a typed ransom letter. From there, they started, negotiating how the ransom would be paid via text messages between Samantha's phone and her father. He wants $30,000. In the meantime, the suspect's testing out Samantha's debit card to see how much money is already on it. That's what got them busted. They were able to follow the tracks of these debit transactions. Then they caught his rental car on camera, and that was it.
What you doing down this way? Oh, visiting family, came down for a wedding.
His name was Israel Keyes. Keyes was arrested in Texas, March 13th, 2012.
Is there a reason you pulled over? Well, I was going to tell you that, but we're investigating kidnapping. Okay. Play that knife right there. Oh, sure.
They found a litany of suspicious items in his rental car. Women's clothing. They found large amounts of cash, tons of weapons in the trunk of his car.
like I say, I would have preferred to wait until they find the bodies in Vermont, but it sounds like
A lot of the Keyes interrogations had somehow made their way to YouTube.
My concern at this point is not knowing, like I say, how current things are going to pan out. The information that I still have could come in handy.
I was fascinated by him.
Except
I think he felt like he was running game. He had been arrested, but he was in control.
And like I said, I don't want to give out everything all at once, but
Keyes named 3 victims. Bill and Lorraine Currier and Samantha Koenig. Keyes confessed he raped and killed Samantha in the shed in his driveway. He dismembered her, took her remains out to Matanuska Lake, about 40 miles north of Anchorage, and set up an ice fishing tent and slowly and methodically submerged her remains in the lake. And then he went home and fed his family the fish that he caught while he was out there. About 6 months before Samantha, Keyes rented a car in cash, drove that car to Vermont, abducted 2 people from their home, Bill and Lorraine Currier, raped and murdered them. Their remains had been abandoned in a farmhouse. Keyes said, "I'm a serial killer who's traveled the country for the last 12 years. I killed over 50 people." There is something excruciatingly terrifying about 50 victims. He's known as the most meticulous serial killer who would plan crimes years in advance and travel great distances. He was in almost every state while he was operating.
I was near the edge, but 30 feet out from the bank on that lake, it drops down to 50, 60 feet already, and I was...
My partner literally eventually started sleeping in the living room because I kind of turned our bedroom into like a war room.
I had her in the front seat, and...
I was just all day long listening to Israel Keyes talk about murdering people.
You have that computer. You wouldn't be giving anything away.
The bosses above us, though, don't know what's on that computer. Yeah, and I know what's
The FBI seized his girlfriend's computer as well as his computer. And while they were running data analysis, they found thousands of images. They ran those images through NamUs, which is a government organization for missing people, using facial recognition. And NamUs found 45 matches. Of those 45, the Curriers were 2, as well as other victims I would investigate later. 9 months after he was arrested, he got a hold of a razor blade, and he slit his wrists and then used a bed sheet to hang himself in his cell. He was found several hours later, dead. They find a note, which is actually drenched in blood. 4 pages of freestyle writing. It looked like song lyrics from death metal bands he liked. It was kind of a manifesto. They found this drawing in his own blood of 12 skulls, and then it scrawled underneath it as "We are all one." The FBI believed these skulls represented Keyes and his victims. So it's reasonable to assume that Keyes had killed at least 11, probably more.
If I'm dead, then the investigation from the federal government's point of view is pretty much closed.
Many of the FBI agents who were investigating this case didn't want to give it up, but because of resources and because Keyes was no longer with us, they had to. It was narratively so different from what we're accustomed to, which is like crime, victim, killer. And here it was like killer, crime, victims? I realized here we have this killer who no one's looking into, and at least 8 victims who have never been identified. And that's where like interest became obsession. When I was growing up, I was always kind of an oddly curious kid.
His remains would be found buried here.
Even like as a weirdo little kid, I was looking into serial killers and missing persons cases. And then we had a family tragedy. My second cousins, they were about my age. There was a break-in at their home. A man kicked down the door, and the older of the two boys, who was, I think, 7, was running to call 911, and the man shot him in the stomach. And then he found the younger, Daniel, and he led him into the bedroom where their mother was hiding, and he shot them both in the head. Billy, who was shot in the stomach, survived. And, like, it hit home in a really real way. I really started at 12 years old evaluating my relationship with true crime. I think because I have an understanding of how grief and trauma affect people, it really struck a nerve with me. There was all these families who don't have answers, and the answers are with this guy who just killed himself. What's been really important to me is to look into potential victims. Producing this podcast, I can share this research, and the further we do it and the further more people get involved, we learn more. So here I am, over 10 years later, doing everything I can to find answers if they're there. Taking trips to places Keyes went could be critical in the investigation into Keyes. There's nothing that is going to stop me from going out and further investigating it.
He had researched and read other serial killers. Israel Keyes didn't kidnap and kill people because he was crazy. Israel Keyes did this because he got an immense amount of enjoyment out of it.
I'd consumed enough true crime that I knew about the Freedom of Information Act requests. So I filed one of those with the FBI. And then the files came. I was not anticipating over 4,000 pages. I start going through the files and the interviews, and the FBI has created a pretty substantial timeline. I can see where Keyes has traveled to. It's great, it's helpful, because there's a lot of components linking Keyes to potential victims. So first is like places he returned to over and over and over again, which is critical in his MO. It shows intent. Keyes had told the FBI every time he was out in the woods or any time he was out driving around, he would look for places that he could abduct people to or abduct people from. And then he would go back and wait in the woods for the right opportunity and the right person. So we should be looking for bodies near roads that he would have taken. Who went missing nearby? Can we place him in the area at the time? And I'm like, okay, add it to the timeline. And it's essentially the timeline of his entire life. I did a bunch of research. I talked to experts.
Investigators say Israel Keyes told authorities he strategically hid a box filled with weapons and tools near the Winooski River.
Keyes quickly became known for his kill kits. He would travel the country and bury or hide kits, usually buckets, full of weapons, rape tools, sometimes costumes. Keyes talked about hiking there, thinking about burying a kill kit there. He had gone out there looking for victims. So.
And it's right off the road, so when you're driving through, you would see it and be like, oh, maybe I'll stop there.
It's a tourist destination. It seems like a really easy place to bury a body and have nobody question it.
It's heavy stuff to do on your own. And I was, in the first 2 years, working 68 to 80 hours a week on this by myself with no one really to turn to.
I think it was because they were doing construction, right? Is that what you figured out?
They had done construction since she was... I was never looking for a team. It happened very organically. There was no way I was inviting someone into this thing that I cared so much about, that I'd already poured years of my life into.
Episode a couple weeks ago.
3 people weaseled their way in, and now I don't know what I'd do without them.
I have no idea how I feel.
As an investigative journalist, one thing that we can do that the police can't always do is we have the time to kind of follow the rabbit holes that we want to follow.
But isn't that
I want to say certainty doesn't exist without forensic evidence. And I am not there yet, and I don't know that I will ever have the tools to be there. So unfortunately, at this point, it's me hopefully inspiring people who do have the tools to do the work. What's been really important to me is taking trips to places Keyes went to look into potential victims. What I can do in the field is see things that a computer can never show me. Being on the ground, you have a better understanding of the culture of an environment. And also, would someone like Israel Keyes bless to visit her while she was working?
There's a gentleman who disappeared from Riverside.
And search records looking for someone who disappeared in Riverside County that week when Donald Tobin disappeared. We looked at the timeline, and it's very tight, but Keyes was unaccounted for in about 20 hours surrounding Donald's disappearance. And as we got further into the investigation, we realized there was a very good likelihood that Keyes was trolling this Christian church outside of Spokane, Washington. He's raised essentially off the grid. He was not introduced to culture, other people, humanity, and was surrounded by people who didn't value human life, who openly hated gay people and black people and brown people. And I mean, imagine what that fosters.
Keyes talked a lot about his animosity towards organized religion, seeing the cross up on the hill. He talked about wanting to kill people at religious sites and churches. What most likely would have occurred is Keyes broke into Donald Tobin's house and then abducted him in his own car, took him to a second location where he presumably would have sexually assaulted and then murdered him, took him to a third location to bury him, and then parked his car here. And Keyes could have easily from here walked back to wherever his car was without ever having been seen.
Keyes wanted to create distance from his crimes as quickly as possible. It's very easy for someone to get from here back onto the freeway in a short period of time. So if you look at the big picture, you've got a trailhead. You've got an environment Keyes is in frequently, and it's very compelling. I think it warrants further investigation into the potential that Keyes was involved in Donald Tobin's disappearance. I published all of this information as ethically as possible in the podcast and immediately put it out into the world. If we can get people interested in this case and get more information out there, we're likely to get more information back, which could help us identify victims.
The other thing I look for is Keyes buried kill kits, often near locations where he planned on abducting people.
Had like a 50-foot coil of nylon rope, duct tape, latex gloves.
Either he would literally bury them or he would hide them in boulders.
Keyes would return to the kill kits.
So yeah, everything I took from their house I wanted to keep separate so I could go through it later. And I thought they were in that bucket where the jewelry is, where the cash is, where the cell phones are.
He told the FBI items he took from his victims are in some of these kill kits, so they are very valuable.
Head west toward Ramona Expressway.
I'm going to go out to Lake Paris, where we have a very credible sighting, placing Keyes potentially with a kill kit. This particular tip came in with the FOIA files I got from the FBI in 2018. Former FBI agent Bobby Chacon is going to meet me out there. He actually worked the case and was responsible for finding one of the kill kits up in upstate New York. So this will be my first time going out to Lake Paris. It's also going to be the first time Bobby's been out to Lake Paris, so especially as someone who's seen places that Keyes has killed before, I know he's pretty eager to get his eyes on this place.
Hey.
Bobby.
Hey, Josh. Good to see you.
Thanks for coming out.
Yeah, no worries. It's my backyard, kind of.
Yeah. Bobby Chacon is one of the first people I talked to when I started digging into this case, and a really great proponent of the work I do.
I was involved in the Israel Keyes case when I was with the FBI. In fact, my dive team went to Alaska and we recovered his final victim, Samantha Koenig.
This tip came in shortly after Keyes died, before a lot of the details of the case have been made public yet.
There was somebody who identified Israel Keyes here as having met him one day.
This guy's out here fishing in March 2011, and Keyes approaches him. He starts talking about how he's hunting, and the guy's like, there's nothing out here to hunt. And Keyes like, I'm here to hunt prey. He's real creeped out by it. Keyes asks him, if you disappeared, would anyone know? He says Keyes comes out of the woods near the porta potties. He's got a rusted shovel, a Home Depot bucket, and a fishing pole. Then he sees him later hiking back up into the woods with this rusted shovel and a bucket. He said he immediately knew this was the man that he had encountered when he saw Israel Keyes' photograph.
Wow.
And so we know Keyes was active in the area at the time. And it turns out close to a year prior, Donald Tobin disappeared within 20 miles away. On top of that, we have Christine Nicole Hamilton, also found on Keyes' computer. She disappeared not far from there. If Keyes was there, what are the greater implications?
I mean, look at all the places you have to hide something if you're going to hide a kill kit, right? You can see all these boulders and these rocks here. Those are the perfect kind of terrain that he could dig a small hole behind a rock and put one of those kits in the ground, and then he could use the rock as a marker. He could make a mental note of what that rock looked like and come back to it. Now, if you had to search that whole area, it would literally take you months because there are so many boulders, and that's why it's such a good location for him to use. But if I was here with an FBI team, I'd probably have 100 agents up there searching that hill, and it could take us a month. A lot of serial killers, they have this ritual that leads up to the killing, hiding those kill kits, picking out places that he would eventually use, even if he wasn't going to use it that day, weeks, months later. This was all part of who he was as a predator. This certainly has a lot of the elements that some of his other places we know he was at, like Matanuska. Lake Matanuska is the lake where Israel Keyes deposited his last victim, Samantha Koenig, when he murdered and dismembered her. A lot of criminals that decide to use water use it again and again and again because they feel like it's a place that evidence goes and never gets recovered.
So in terms of credibility on this tip, what do you think?
I mean, look, it fits all the criteria that Keyes used to kind of pick out not only victims but places. It definitely puts this place in contention for highly likely that something happened here.
So then it's like, well, there's probably a victim somewhere in the area. It's wild.
I'd be really surprised if there weren't bodies at the bottom of that lake.
"52-year-old Donald Tobin was last seen on July 7th. Police suspect foul play in his disappearance. We have a Keyes sighting several miles away, and the details of the disappearance match everything we know about Keyes' MO.
Every day, I comb through missing persons cases, and because of the nature of my work, I'm deeply aware of the gravity of, like, not only are each of these human beings who are attached to many other human beings, but there's so many of them. I keep going back to the main objective, which is there are families who don't know what happened to their loved one, and no one else is looking. I had covered Susie Lyle's case several years ago. Her name was found on Keyes' computer. There are a lot of significant circumstantial evidence to look at Keyes as being responsible for her disappearance. Suzanne Lyle was really intelligent, really bubbly teenage girl who grew up in the greater Albany area. Susie was a student at SUNY Albany. She was really into computers. She worked at Babbage's, which was at the time like electronics store, basically, like computer games and video games. And you have to remember, this is in 1998. She was like playing online video games and like really into the digital world before the rest of us were. And one night, Susie was working at Babbage's, and after leaving Babbage's, she was never seen again. Right around the time she went missing, Keyes was living in Constable, New York. Susie was about Keyes' age, 19 years old. She had a very robust online lifestyle, and that's something that comes up in the Keyes case. He said he was going down to Albany while he was living up in Constable and going to computer labs and libraries and using computers there. At a certain point, Susie told a friend that she felt like a man had been following her. And is it possible that the man that Suzanne felt was following her was, in fact, Keyes?
Keep right to take exit 3 towards Albany International.
What's great about this trip is we're going to meet Dr. Kunkel at the airport. How's it going? Good for coming out. Dr. Kunkel is a criminal psychologist, one of my favorite people. He's really immersed himself in all things Keyes.
I got involved with the Lyle case as part of the St. Rose Cold Case Analysis Center. We were asked by Mary Lyle, Suzanne Lyle's mother, to get involved and look at the investigation.
If Susie was a Keyes victim, it would have been earlier on in the commission of his crimes. So he wouldn't have been as sophisticated as far back as 1997 and 1998 when his crimes began. We believe, based on sightings, that Susie either disappeared leaving her workplace or disappeared getting off the bus at SUNY's campus. It would be perfectly natural for someone who looked like Keyes to be on a college campus.
Yeah. He would draw no attention here. All right, so this is, the bus stop's over here, over closer to her dorm. It was a Monday night, and she's coming back from work. There's probably others coming from that direction, using the bus to get back to campus. It probably wasn't desolate.
Yeah. So I guess if she comes off the bus stop, you know, this is one logical route to her dorm. It could have been an abduction site.
Right, yeah.
If you're Keyes, you're looking for a place where you can lie in wait and not really be seen. And there's not really a lot of that.
Basically, as we've been standing here, everybody who got off the bus and came to this quad walked up this walkway or down there through the trees over there and into the quad.
Yeah.
I mean, the only other point of access is like right here in front of everyone.
Yeah.
Which doesn't make any sense at all.
It's a very high-risk environment.
There's no way to track whether she actually got on the bus. Back then, they were just showing their ID as a SUNY student, and you just ride.
Now that we're here and we see
right
how many people are around and what a short distance it is,
right,
it seems more likely that she went missing at Crossgates Mall rather than here.
We know she was at the mall.
Yeah.
That's irrefutable. She worked that day, and her manager saw her leave and said he knows what exit she took.
Around the same time that Suzanne Lyle disappeared, just miles from where she was last seen, a woman encountered a man in a Marshall's parking lot that she believed was Keyes. What stood out to us was the things he was asking her. How old are you? If you left right now, would anyone notice? Some blatantly disturbing questions. These come up over and over and over again in tips in places where Keyes was. We can place him in the Albany area that spring, looking to abduct someone from a mall parking lot.
Suzanne Lyle was working at the Crossgates Mall on the night of her disappearance.
More than likely, she disappeared at the mall, walking from Babbage's to the bus stop. Right around the time Suzanne Lyle went missing, Keyes was working on enlisting in the Army, and the Army recruitment office was 2 miles from where she was last seen. This is where Keyes enlisted in the Army. He, at that point, was really disagreeing with his parents. They were very anti-government, so it would make sense for someone rebelling, also someone who had a desire to hurt people, to join the Army. Joining the Army gives him the paycheck. And license to kill. And now maybe he's like, okay, if it's time, I can start committing crimes in this area, because I'm going to be leaving soon. He told the FBI that he planned his murders around travels because after a girl is abducted, no one's going to look at the guy who goes off to the Army or left at 4 in the morning to go on a vacation. He wanted to create as much distance, physically and psychologically, between himself and his crimes.
So the Marshall's location to here is interesting. Basically just right across the street. It doesn't seem like he was actually trying to abduct her. It almost seems like he was ramping up. He was testing to decide what he'll do next.
But what killed me is walking out here, and the first thing you see is a cemetery.
I know.
He told the FBI cemetery outbuildings were easy to gain access to, and they were great places to rape and murder victims. And walkable through the woods to 6 Mile Waterworks Park, where there's a reservoir and tons of outbuildings.
Yeah. When you bring up 6 Mile Waterworks, it's the only body of water within like this 3-4 mile radius between the 2 malls, the campus, parking lot.
And 6 Mile Waterworks Park is in the center of all 4 points: Colony Center, Marshall's, SUNY, and Babbage's. You can walk through the park from any 4 of those points without really being seen. The fact that he could walk through that park unseen to all 4 destinations is fascinating. You had said they'd searched it pretty extensively, right?
Well, they said they did, but I believe they didn't use dogs and they never checked the water.
And at this point, we know Keyes liked to submerge his victims' remains in water. If it was Keyes, Susie's final resting place is possibly Waterworks Park.
The timing of her abduction and his being in the area, and then the other signature Keyes offense patterns, it just makes sense.
There was a lot of compelling evidence there, but we can't say for sure we've solved the case. I don't think in terms of justice or closure, because I don't think there can be justice or closure in family upheaval. I think about Susie Lyle a lot in this regard. Imagine being known worldwide only for the worst thing to ever happen to you. And when people want to talk about Susie, that's what they want to talk about. The first time I met Dr. Kunkel, I was invited to speak at an event in Saratoga Springs. Mary Lyle, Susie's mother, was going to be there, and I got to meet her, and it was so humbling. to meet Susie's mom and hear her talk about Susie, I felt like I got to know who she was from the person who knew her the best. So, in a sense, if there is an obligation, it is to treat these people like more than just the worst thing that ever happened to them.
Both Chris and I are committed to investigating until there are no stones left to turn over.
All right. Yeah, take care, Chris.
Until then, I find myself obsessively driving the back roads of Berkshire County and upstate New York, looking for something.
In addition to the Suzanne Lyle case, there are others that I'm quite confident were keys, but I still would like a little more reassurances on. The first two are Cammie and Jean. Cammie was a high school student living in Oregon. She was 16. She had just met this boyfriend, Eugene, and they decided to go for a walk out on the Oregon coast. And no one ever saw him again. The police quickly leaned into the theory they'd been swept out to sea, and ultimately, the police stopped looking into it. Keyes had told the FBI that following his discharge from the Army, he had abducted a male-female couple from either Washington State or one of its surrounding states. I've looked into it extensively. There's only one case that matches that description, and it's Cammie and Eugene's case. Obviously, since the first episode, you know, I've had family members reach out to me, which is great, because that is an honor and a privilege and quite humbling to have those experiences and relationships and get to know these people and know that they value the work I'm doing. I'm always anxious about covering someone's case because I don't know how the family's going to feel about it, and I was appreciative that you reached out to me. I don't know, you've done a really good job of like bringing her to life and making sure she stays in the forefront of people's memories, and it's really wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, she was a special person. She was.
I mean, I've reached out to Lincoln County. I've not heard back, but I keep hoping the FBI will like release more of the redacted files at some point, and I think that's the best thing we can wish for.
And I cannot thank you enough. Like, seriously.
I have done very little, so I did the bare minimum.
No. Hands down. You've done so much. I'm just grateful that you want closure for the families, whether it's my family or other people's families.
We've also seen that while his memory for locations is startlingly accurate, it's the first time I've had a job that I believe in the work that I'm doing. I've even had law enforcement reach out to me to be like, hey, we have this missing persons case, do you think it's Keyes?
The most infuriating thing about investigating Israel Keyes is without a body or biometric evidence, it's nearly impossible to truly confirm he's responsible for any missing person.
There are all these families who don't know what happened to their loved ones. At this point, I am invested, and I care immensely. Maybe a very small price to pay for that is like, yeah, a serial killer lives rent-free in the back of my brain for the rest of my life.
The problem is nowadays, the more stuff my name is attached to, the more likely it is that somebody's gonna try to do some kind of stupid freaking TV special, or you know how it is nowadays, like with all this true crime bull.
When I started putting the podcast together and writing the first season, I was very compelled by that line. Like, I don't want to be wrapped up in all this true crime bull. It's what I ultimately named the podcast. I thought it was a nice cue to Keyes to be like, hey, not only is the media covering your case, but we're using your words to do it. More and more people are learning about Keyes. And we're getting more and more information because of that, which could help us identify victims, which will help bring some resolve to families who, for now, over a decade, don't know what happened to their loved ones.